Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Ada Hoffmann, author of the new novel, The Fallen. Ada, welcome to the podcast.
Tommy, it's nice to meet you.
Absolutely. Well, if someone hasn't yet heard about your latest novel, The Fallen, how would you describe the novel?
All right, so The Fallen is the sequel to my debut novel, The Outside. It's the second in a planned trilogy. And this series is a cosmic horror space opera. So it is set in a universe where some artificially intelligent supercomputers have set themselves up as gods to be worshipped, and now they control the galaxy. And our protagonist, Yasira Shen, is a scientist who gets kind of caught up in the conflict between these gods who are not entirely trustworthy and some kind of cosmic horror entities which are perhaps even less so. Now, The Fallen takes place, obviously, after quite a lot has already happened in the first book, The Outside. And one of the things that's happened is a good chunk of an entire planet has been kind of corrupted by the cosmic horrors. And so Yasira and her friends are trying to figure out how to help people there, how to make living conditions better, and how to kind of protect them from the gods who would like the whole area to just go away, please. And so it's a book about how people respond and kind of help each other after disasters. It's a book also about because Yasira is a neurodivergent character and many of her friends in the book are also neurodivergent characters. It's also a book about how people can come together and help each other in the wake of like a disaster, that kind of trauma, but it's also about how mentally ill and neurodivergent people form communities. And if that's too introspective for you, there are also, things blowing up. So.
Do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to write The Fallen and this trilogy?
So, to some extent, really the impetus was that I had become attached to the characters of The Outside, and I wanted to continue writing them. I didn't feel that I had really finished writing about them. I wanted their story to continue. And so The Fallen it stems from there. It stems from me trying to figure out where the characters are going and how they're reacting after everything that happened to them in the first book. In a lot of ways, plotting the second book in a trilogy can be quite challenging because it needs to move things along. It needs to introduce new challenges and new developments in the conflicts you introduced in the first book. It has to lead up to the very large kind of concluding events that are going to happen in the third book. But it also has to be a satisfying conflict of its own. It has to be like kind of the right size. So it took a bit of kind of fiddling with that and going back and forth about it before I had a structure for this book that really worked very well.
Gotcha. So I'm curious, what was your writing journey that led you to writing and getting your first novel published?
So, in some sense, I've always, of course, been writing for fun. I started writing for publication in about 2009. So, like a decade before The Outside was published. And for a lot of that time, I was publishing short stories and poetry. That's where I was focusing, and that's how I was building my craft. I published a short story collection, Monsters in My Mind. You can look at some of that work that I was doing. But what led to me writing the outside a proper sized novel was actually a funny story. I had actually become very attached to a couple of characters that I had encountered in a Dungeons and Dragons game that I was playing. And I was like, I want to write about these characters more. But I was like, nobody wants to read Dungeons and Dragons with the serial numbers filed off. That's not a thing. That's not going to work. So what I ended up doing is that I filed up the serial numbers so hard that it ended up being a space opera. I was that was my process.
And I'm curious, how was it for you making the transition from writing short stories to writing novels?
Well, it's interesting. There are some skills that carry over very smoothly, like how to write a sentence, how to describe things, how to write dialogue, And there were other things that were, there are some things that work completely differently in a novel than they do in a short story. Pacing was very challenging for me. And I had to redo the opening of The Outside several times because the first few times I approached it, I was trying to approach it as if it was a short story. And I was trying to introduce everything at once, much too fast for the medium of a novel. And it wasn't working. I had to really spread the opening out a bit. And people who pick up The Outside will still tell you, they'll say, wow, those first 3 chapters, those are actually quite fast paced. But it took a while for me to get them to a point where they were structured well and not just.
Hey, this is Jeff, the host of the Reading and Writing podcast. Thanks again for listening to the podcast. I have a company that I want to tell you about that I think you will definitely be interested in as a podcast listener. Family Sounds. Have you ever gone to a family reunion and traded stories and laughed with your relatives, and later you thought, gosh, I wish there was some way that we had a way to preserve those stories and preserve those memories when we're not face to face? Well, now you do with Family Sounds. Family Sounds can create an hour-long podcast that's just for you, that's just for your family, that tells the stories of your family and your relatives. And Family Sounds team, they're pros. They've done this before. They have lots of experience crafting stories for public broadcasting through radio and podcasts. They will use your family's voices as well as a professional narrator to tie the story together. Again, the name of the company is Family Sounds, and you can find them at family-sounds.com/books. Again, that is family-sounds.com/books. Family Sounds, your memories, your family in a podcast today. So check them out. family-sounds.com/books. Thanks for listening. Are you on a search for a special holiday or birthday gift for a reader in your life? A reader who loves history? Well, I've got a suggestion for you. How about giving them weekly historic letters in the mail from Letterjoy? Every week, they'll receive a letter from a famous historical figure or an eloquent eyewitness to a major event. Past Letterjoy letters have included famous defense attorneys, the United States and China, or working on the railroad, exploring the American history of the railroads. For example, one letter was an engineer writing home to his wife to describe the tough process of laying tracks for the Transcontinental Railroad. Every Letterjoy letter arrives at your door on fine stationery or parchment with a real stamp. And each letter also includes the postscript, an article by expert curators on the latest letter and the historical figures and events connected to it. Visit letterjoy.co to give weekly historic letters to the historian in your life. And I have a special offer for listeners of this podcast. Use promo code BOOKS at checkout to get $5 towards your first order. Again, that's letterjoy.co, promo code BOOKS, to give a special gift to the reader in your life.
I don't know, not just rushing through all the introductions.
Sure. And what helped you with that? Was it something that you had to basically learn on your own? Were you getting feedback from your editor or from beta readers?
Well, there was a lot of trial and error, but I did have good beta readers, and I was listening to their advice. I also, in the early stages of working on the outside, I also had one of my friends from the D&D game that inspired the book, who was helping me look at the chapters and really talking about what we wanted to see from the story and what we wanted from these characters. And that was very helpful.
That's great. Well, what was your process when you were working on your first two novels? Do you outline the novel extensively? Or are you someone who just dives into the narrative? What was that process like for you?
My usual process is that I outline, and it's a relatively loose outline. I know how the story is going to start. I know how it's going to end. I know roughly how we're going to get from here to there. And I know some good set pieces and scenes that are in my head that are kind of points we're going to hit along the way. So I have a rough idea of how it's going to work before I start drafting. But when I start drafting, I inevitably find there are things that come up in the process of drafting that I hadn't considered. And I find that the characters' arcs and the subtleties of the emotions they're having as the story moves on often surprise me during drafting. And sometimes I even find the story needs to take a bit of a different turn because of that than what I planned. So I believe the term is plantsing, when you've got kind of a plan, but you're also encountering a lot of surprises on the way.
Sure. So what is it about speculative fiction that appeals to you both as a writer and as a reader?
Well, I grew up reading speculative fiction. It was what we read in my family. And I've just always felt that being able to access other worlds, other ideas of how the world might work, and to imagine magic happening or ridiculous future science happening or aliens happening or, any of these things, it was just natural for me growing up to include all of these kinds of things in my imagination. And to me, if I tried to write something that wasn't science fiction or fantasy, I would almost feel hemmed in, I would feel limited. I would feel like, who decided these boundaries apply to reality and not these other ones? It's what feels natural to me.
Sure. Well, what writing advice would you offer for those who are working on their own short stories or novels?
Well, I think the biggest thing that was helpful to me, especially at the beginning of my writing journey, was to find a critique group and really get used to, first of all, the taking critique and considering critique from other people and figuring out what you're going to do in response to critique, because that is not always straightforward and it does take some emotional skills that you have to build. But also learning to critique other people's work really helps you get a sense of what you're looking for in a story and how to tell if the writing is meeting your expectations or not. And that in turn is going to build skills that you can apply to your own work. So there are places, if you don't have a group of friends who are also writers and can beta read for you, if you don't have that right out the gate, there are groups online you can join. I used to use a website called Critique Circle, which I believe is still going. I used to use a site called the Online Writers Workshop. And just get as much experience as you can with that back and forth of critiquing and revision and editing. That's going to really help you up your game.
So are you writing your third novel in the trilogy now?
Yes, I am writing the third novel of the trilogy, and it is quite behind schedule, but we are working on it, and it's going to get done. And I am just starting right now to come up to the point where they have the big final battle and everything's very dramatic. It's on my mind.
Good. Not that you have to give away any details, but I'm curious in terms of like how your writing mind works. Have you started thinking about what you'll write after you finish this third novel of the trilogy?
I have some vague ideas, and I have no idea if any of them are going to turn out to be what I actually end up working on after the end. I want to give myself a little time to think about that afterwards.
Sure. Well, what novels or nonfiction books have you read recently that you enjoyed?
Oh my gosh. I just recently, a couple of months ago, discovered the Locked-In Trilogy, Gideon the Ninth and Harold the Ninth, and whatever's after that I don't think she's written yet. And I have been having so much fun with them. They're amazing.
That's great. Well, where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you and your trilogy?
People can look at my official website, which is adahoffmann.com. I have a little blog there. I have some reviews of books, and I have information about all of my own books, and all of my stories. That's all up there on the website. You can also find me on Twitter. I am X-Asymptote on Twitter, which is a pain to spell, but you can find me. You can just search for Ada Hoffmann and you will find me
Sure.
on Twitter. And that's where I interact with readers the most, I think, is on Twitter.
That's great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Ada Hoffmann, author of the new novel, The Fallen. The book is on sale now, so go buy a copy at your local independent bookstore. And Ada, thanks for doing this interview.
Oh, you're welcome. It was great.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
For too long, we've lived in a world of canceled and delayed. No more. Those plans you've been making, they're on. Thanks to OnGo, the #1 ranked at-home rapid COVID-19 test. So that vacation where you get to swim with the pigs, it's on. Your friend's wedding that was pushed back 4 times, it's on. The roar of the stadium, it's on too. OnGo, COVID-19 test results in minutes. OnGo is available at letsongo.com/radio and Amazon. This product has been authorized by the FDA during the public health emergency only, and only for the detection of proteins from SARS-CoV-2, not other viruses. The claim #1 ranked is supported by ECRI's usability evaluation conducted in December 2021.
Winter can wreak havoc on your skin. Hey, it's Kayla, and it's not just the weather, but as a new mom, I've seen my skin change in ways that I'm not too happy about. But that's where the Skin Center has you covered. Their most popular treatment is Botox because they're the best at it. They've been ranked a top 10 provider in the nation by Allergan Aesthetics, the makers of Botox. And their best facial is what I got. It's the HydraFacial. It exfoliates, extracts, and hydrates all at once. So save your skin from these winter blues and DM at the Skin Center MD on Instagram and mention code Kayla to get $100 off your first Botox or filler treatment or any skincare package.